My husband missed our child's birth. Then a nurse delivered a surprising gift. Rachel Anderson's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel of her aging sedan. The harsh Seattle rain blurring the world outside into streaks of gray and silver. Her breath hitched in the tight confines of the car as another sharp contraction came crashing over her. She'd been trying to stay calm, trusting the midwife's advice to time her breathing and keep her mind steady. But fear nipped away at her resolve like a persistent shadow. This was it, her first labor, the moment she'd dreamed about for so long, and yet the loneliness felt suffocating. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard. Mike was supposed to be here by now. Her husband, her partner in every plan they'd made for this new chapter. But the minutes had stretched into an unforgiving hour since that first call to him, and he hadn't arrived. She'd seen the message now. The curt apology peppered with work jargon and promises to make it up soon. A meeting had apparently run late. Important clients, he'd said. And though rationally she could understand the pressures Mike faced as a junior partner at the law firm, her heart sank with each ignored ring. Wasn't this moment important? Wasn't she important? The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Rachel maneuvered her way inside, her jeans damp and her face flushed from the effort. Nurses bustled around, clipboard in hand, wrapped in their white scrubs like warriors on a battlefield she wasn't prepared for. She shivered, not because of the cold, but because the hum of whispered conversations cut at her spirit. Someone glanced her way, then away, exchanging looks that pinned her like invisible arrows. A group of women, she recognized from the apartment complex across the street, hovered near the waiting area. Their heads bent low. Rachel's stomach churned as hushed tones floated on the sterile air. She's all alone, can you believe it? Mike's probably at some dinner party or working late again. Another chuckled, loud enough for Rachel to catch it. No wonder she's struggling. No support, no one to lean on. The words felt like daggers slicing through the fog of pain and excitement. She swallowed hard, cheeks burning with a shame she had no way to shake off. Rachel's eyes darted to the nurses nearby. One of them, tall, stern-faced, met her gaze momentarily, lips twitching in what might have been a smirk. The barriers between patient and staff suddenly seemed less official and more like social walls, rigid and cold. The air was thick with judgment, and Rachel felt as fragile as the baby inside her, vulnerable beyond measure. Her body jolted as another contraction seized her, forcing her to clutch the side of the hospital bed hastily prepared. The beeping monitors began their steady rhythm, echoing in her ears, a relentless countdown to a future unknown. Her thoughts swirled. Mike wasn't here. Would he ever be here? The room felt cavernous, empty except for the sterile linoleum floor and the harsh lighting that did nothing to soften the gnawing sense of isolation. She tried to steady her breath, tried to recall the birthing classes, the affirmation tapes she'd listened to late at night. But all she could hear were distant voices and sharp judgments, and the hollow ache where she had expected comfort. Tears blurred her vision, but she swallowed them back fiercely, not wanting the strangers in the hallway to see her unravel. How had it come to this? A woman preparing to bring new life into the world, standing alone amid whispers and cold stares. Yet beneath that frustration, an ember of resilience clung stubbornly to her heart. Whatever happened, she would face this moment, for her child, for herself. As Rachel's phone buzzed quietly on the bedside table, a small voice within her asked, "If you were watching from the outside, what would you tell her right now? Would you tell her to hold on, to stay strong?" The question hovered, inviting a silent answer, an invitation to those who could see the pain behind her eyes to send some invisible support into the chilly hospital room. The rain outside softened to a gentle patter as Rachel prepared to meet the greatest challenge of her life, alone but not defeated. The waiting room felt colder than the sterile hospital room Rachel now found herself in. the low murmurs outside the door seeping through like a tie of judgment she couldn't escape. Hours had passed, and the contractions that first seemed manageable were now a relentless wave crashing over her, each one stealing a breath and shattering a fragile calm. She gripped the handrails of the hospital bed, knuckles white, struggling not to cry out as another contraction gripped her like a vice. Mike still hadn't shown. The promise he made, "I'll be right there, just a bit longer," echoed empty and hollow in her mind. Her phone lay silent beside her, the expected call conspicuously absent. The gnawing knot in her stomach twisted tighter. Doubt crept in, cold as the evening air outside. Did he even care? The thought prickled past the defenses she fought so hard to maintain, gnashing on every bit of hope she had held on to since the beginning. A nurse entered, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the machines as she adjusted the IV drip. For a moment, Rachel thought she might offer some solace, but instead, the nurse barely glanced at her and muttered about no-shows and unreliable partners. The words, soft but sharp, sank into Rachel's bruised heart. She swallowed hard, a bitter sting rising at the back of her throat. Others in the room, a few patients and hospital staff, exchanged glances and whispered remarks. Their voices were like a soundtrack of scorn that carved through Rachel's attempt to steady herself. From the corner, a woman with a bored expression leaned close to another patient and whispered, loud enough for Rachel to hear, "He must be a real coward." Another chimed in, "Some men don't understand what support means until it's too late." Rachel's cheeks flushed crimson with a mixture of anger and humiliation. Through the haze of pain, she saw a nurse beside the door smirk ever so slightly before turning away. The bitterness crept into her bones. They judged her, not just for her solitude, but for the man who failed her. Her mind raced, flashing back to the days before labor, when Mike had promised he'd be there for every moment. She tried to convince herself it was just bad timing, that his work truly was demanding. But the whispers and sidelong glances chipped away at the facade. She was now painfully aware that in the eyes of strangers, her distress was a spectacle, and her husband's absence a source of entertainment. Alone and exposed, the ring closed in on Rachel as a sharp contraction took hold with sudden force. She doubled over, gasping, hands pressing into the bed, sweat slicking her temples. Tears slicked unbidden down her face. It wasn't just the physical pain anymore. It was the raw, gnawing ache of disappointment and shame she'd never imagined feeling on the day meant to be one of joy. The fear wrapped tightly around her, not just fear of the labor's unknowns, but fear that her own strength might fail under the weight of solitude and judgment. Her eyes flicked toward the door, willing Mike to come bursting through, to defy the meeting, the work, the life that kept him away from this moment. But the hallway remained quiet, the only sound the low hum of hospital machinery and whispered conversation. Rachel's heart ached in waves as the embers of her dreams dimmed beneath the cold weight of reality. She wanted to scream, to ask how he could choose this over their child's birth, over her. Instead, she bit her lip, drawing in a shuddering breath and pushing herself upright. A faint voice inside urged her not to collapse completely, not yet. But the worst was yet to come. The whispers outside the door grew louder. Now a nurse approached her bedside with cold efficiency. "Your husband called," she said brusquely, holding out the phone. Rachel reached for it, hope fluttering momentarily. But the voice on the other end was distant and detached, a rushed apology drowned by urgent chatter in the background. Mike said he couldn't leave. That work had to come first. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering softly against the metal bed frame. Humiliation sprawled over her skin like a second, unbearable labor. She was alone. She was failing. And the strangers around her, neighbors she'd shared smiles with in the hallways, Faces she knew, judged her, laughed at her. Rachel's breath hitched as the realization settled like a lead weight. This was more than physical pain. This was a turning point. Either she would sink under the shame and loneliness, or find something within her deeper than the hurt. But right now, shrouded in sweat and tears and whispered ridicule, she felt as small and helpless as the fragile life stirring inside her. If you've ever felt invisible in your darkest hour, you understand how Rachel's isolation felt like 1,000 silent screams. What would you have done if the people you trusted abandoned you at your most vulnerable? The sterile hospital room felt more like a prison than a sanctuary, its cold walls closing in on Rachel as exhaustion and pain coiled tightly around her mind and body. Hours since Mike's call had ended abruptly, cutting through her hope like a blade. She lay curled against the thin hospital sheets, every ache magnified by the crushing weight of solitude. The weight in her chest was not just from labor, but from the silence that pressed heavily, a silence filled by the absence of the man who once promised to be by her side. Her mind replayed his distant words, the hurried tone, the invisible barrier his work had built between them. She was no longer just a woman in labor. She was a woman betrayed by the very promises she had held on to with all her fragile trust. Her throat felt raw and dry from swallowed sobs, and yet the tears refused to fall freely now, trapped behind clenched jaws. There was shame tangled with grief, a tangled knot that gnawed at the edges of her spirit. The neighbors from the apartment hallway, who had passed judgment earlier, were still present in her memory, their whispers carving invisible scars deeper than any physical pain. She imagined their eyes on her, the pity disguised as ridicule. Rachel hated their gaze. She hated how small their words made her feel. Yet beneath that self-reproach lay a fierce ember of something else, an unwillingness to be broken completely, a hint of defiance, shimmering faintly beneath the fear. The hospital staff moved about the room with clinical efficiency, offering necessary medical care, but little warmth. It was in this sea of indifference that a new figure stepped in, Grace, a nurse with a calm presence that seemed to slow time itself. She arrived quietly, her voice gentle yet resolute, a contrast to the colder words Rachel had endured. As Grace adjusted the monitors beside her, she spoke softly. "You're doing better than you think, Rachel. It's okay to be scared. This is a lot." That simple acknowledgement, a recognition of her pain rather than a dismissal, brought a surprising spark of relief. For the first time in hours, Rachel felt less like a spectacle and more like a human being deserving of kindness. Grace stayed by her side, offering soft encouragements and guiding her through the overwhelming moments. When the pain peaked again, Rachel found herself clinging not just to the bed rails, but to Grace's unwavering presence. It was as if Grace's calm had seeded a lifeline, threading through the storm inside Rachel's chest. Between contractions, she whispered words of comfort, a steady anchor when everything else seemed adrift. "You are stronger than you know. This moment doesn't define you." The statement, simple yet profound, brushed against Rachel's frayed self-esteem and began to loosen the grip of despair. Amid the pain and vulnerability, Rachel allowed herself a brief, hopeful thought. Maybe this was the beginning of something different, a chance to reclaim her strength, piece by piece. Although Mike's absence still throbbed like a wound, the reminder that she was not truly alone gave her a fragile thread of hope. There were other women, others like her, facing their own unknowns with quiet courage. Perhaps she could find them, learn from them, and in doing so, learn to rise again. But even in Grace's supportive presence, shadows lingered. Rachel fought with her own self-doubt, wrestling through memories of laughter turned to sneers, the whispered blame, the cold shoulders of acquaintances who should have offered solace. The room sometimes felt too heavy, her body too weak, her spirit on the brink of surrender. She wondered if anyone truly saw her courage beneath the exhaustion. The fear of failing loomed large, a specter she could not shake. Was she strong enough? Would she be enough for the life beginning inside her? At one moment, as twilight seeped through the curtained windows, Rachel's eyes filled with tears she finally let fall. She cradled her swollen belly and whispered to the child she barely knew, "I'm sorry, I'm scared, but I promise I'll keep fighting for you." The vow was a fragile promise, a beacon to guide her through the darkest hours ahead. In that vulnerable space, the phone on the bedside table buzzed with a new message. Rachel glanced at it hesitantly, a text from a distant cousin she barely knew, offering visits, meals, and a shoulder to lean on. The simple outreach flickered a fragile lifeline, reminding her that kindness could bloom in unexpected places. If you've ever faced loneliness wrapped in pain, you understand how vital even a small moment of hope can feel. Rachel took a slow, trembling breath, letting that thread of encouragement weave softly into her heart. Though the road ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, the seeds of resilience were quietly blossoming. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would find the strength to rewrite her story, not as a woman abandoned, but as one who rose amidst the ruins, carrying her child into a world where love and courage could still take root. The night stretched on mercilessly, turning Rachel's hospital room into a chamber of endless pain and solitary struggle. Every muscle ached, her breath came in ragged gasps, and waves of exhaustion crashed over her with unrelenting force. As the hours crawled by, the absence of Mike haunted the sterile space like a ghost, a cold reminder of promises broken and support withheld. Rachel's spirit, once flickering with tentative hope, now teetered on the edge of collapse, battered by loneliness and whispered judgments that seemed to echo relentlessly beyond the walls. Her body trembled, sweat slicking her forehead as another surge of contraction threatened to pull her under. Her vision blurred, the room spun dizzily. Panic flared, tangled with pain, and for a moment she felt utterly alone against the tempest. The sterile lights above gleamed harshly, spotlighting her weakness in the midst of strangers who seemed more observers than allies. The murmurs from the hallway seeped in like cold drafts, the familiar voices from her building and hospital clientele, their sniff disdain, a cruel chorus underscoring her isolation. When Rachel's strength finally faltered, her body surrendering to the torment, a young nurse burst into the room with urgency, a new face she hadn't seen before. Calm yet determined, her eyes held a kindness that pierced the bleak atmosphere. "Rachel," she said, kneeling at her side, "we're going to get through this together. You're not alone." The words were simple, but in that moment they struck a chord deep within Rachel's battered heart. The nurse's name was Grace, and she moved with a warmth that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She took Rachel's trembling hands in hers, steadying her with a presence that was both tender and fierce. As the labor intensified, Grace's reassurances wove around Rachel like a protective shield. "You are stronger than you think," she murmured, guiding her breaths, her voice a balm on raw nerves. And then came the unexpected. Grace reached into her pocket and pulled out a delicate necklace, a slender silver chain holding a small pendant shaped like a phoenix rising from ashes. "This," Grace whispered, fastening it gently around Rachel's neck, "is a symbol of rebirth and resilience. Remember, in your darkest moments, you have the power to rise again." Tears blurred Rachel's vision as the gift settled against her skin, an emblem of strength she had nearly forgotten she possessed. The pain crescendoed, a final surge that carried with it both agony and promise. With Grace's gentle guidance and unwavering support, Rachel found herself summoned from the depths. Amid the exhaustion and fear, a miracle unfolded. The first cry of her newborn broke through the thickened silence, a note pure and defiant. The room transformed instantly. What had been a chamber of isolation brimmed with new life and fragile hope. As Rachel cradled her child for the first time, she felt a profound shift within her, an alchemy of pain and joy, of loss transformed into power. The whispers outside abruptly silenced. The neighbors, the staff, the judges peering through the veil of suspicion, now bore witness to something transcendent. Even Mike, who finally arrived, breathless and apologetic, stood at the doorway, astonished and humbled by the scene. His absence had marked the threshold of despair. But this moment demanded recognition of a truth he could not ignore. Rachel's courage, her unyielding strength, and the life she had brought into the world alone, yet unbowed. Grace's gift hung heavy with meaning. More than just a necklace, it was a beacon illuminating the path ahead. Rachel knew the road to healing, both within her marriage and herself, would be long. But this unexpected kindness, this symbol of renewal, planted seeds of hope. She caught Mike's eyes across the room, searching for remorse, for willingness to truly stand beside her, beyond mere words. The evening waned, yet the promise it bore refused to fade. Rachel's journey had dipped to the darkest depths, but from that chasm, an ember was rekindled. Her story was no longer just one of abandonment or humiliation. It had become a testament to resilience, to the power of unexpected allies, and the quiet miracles hidden within human kindness. Have you ever felt broken at your most vulnerable, only to find strength in an unexpected place? Rachel's experience reminds us that even in the darkest hours, hope can arise, sometimes wrapped in the gentle hands of a stranger, a simple gift, or the quiet roar of a newborn's first breath. It's in these moments that we discover what we're truly made of, and the profound truth that we can always rise again, no matter how deep the fall. The days that followed the birth brought a whirlwind of emotions swirling around Rachel as she navigated the fragile terrain between newfound strength and lingering vulnerability. The hospital room, once a place of isolation and whispered judgments, became a quiet sanctuary where she learned to cradle not only her newborn son, but also the shattered pieces of her own spirit. Grace's presence remained a steady pillar of comfort, her gentle encouragement acting as a balm against the wounds left by Mike's absence and the silent skepticism of others. Each day, Rachel felt herself growing, tentatively, sometimes painfully, but surely. Mike's return had not brought the immediate reconciliation Rachel yearned for. His apologies, earnest but awkward, hung in the air like fragile threads, waiting to be woven into something stronger. The guilt in his eyes was undeniable. Yet the chasm between words and actions loomed large. Rachel's heart wrestled with conflicting desires, a longing for the partner she once knew, and a fierce protectiveness over the new life she was now solely responsible for. She needed him to prove that his love went beyond mere presence, to show that he was willing to step away from his ambitions and into their family. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, culminating one crisp afternoon at a local community center where Rachel attended a mother's support group, a lifeline she had hesitantly sought out after a whispered recommendation from Grace. The room was filled with faces both familiar and new, women carrying their own stories of joy and heartbreak, resilience and struggle. For the first time in weeks, Rachel felt the heavy cloak of judgment lift slightly, replaced by something akin to empathy and understanding. As discussions unfurled about motherhood, societal expectations, and the quiet battles fought by women beyond what the world saw, Rachel found her voice. Her words began as tentative murmurs, but grew steadier, a tide rising with passion and conviction. She spoke of betrayal, of loneliness, and of the raw ache of feeling unseen in a moment that should have been sacred. She spoke of strength, both hers and that of every woman who had fought to reclaim dignity in the face of abandonment and indifference. Her voice carried across the room, rippling through the shared pain and transforming it into collective power. The group listened, faces softening with solidarity. A woman nearby, clasping her newborn tightly, nodded with tears glistening in her eyes. Grace, sitting silently at the edge of the circle, offered a proud smile. It was a moment of reckoning, not just for Rachel, but for every mother who had felt diminished by their circumstances. Mike, waiting outside the center, unsure but drawn to witness the scene, saw his wife not as a fragile victim, but as a fierce warrior standing tall. This confrontation with her own truth and public assertion of worth marked a turning point. Rachel began to reclaim her narrative, not as a woman defined by absence or shame, but as one who demanded respect and genuine partnership. Mike, confronted with the depth of her pain and strength, faced a choice: to continue hiding behind excuses or to step forward with humility and commitment. Slowly, he began to show up, not just physically, but emotionally, attending appointments, learning late-night feedings, and opening conversations about their future as parents and partners. The journey was neither smooth nor swift. There were days filled with frustration, tears, and doubt. Yet beneath the turbulence, a slow but steady healing unfolded. Rachel discovered within herself a reservoir of resilience she hadn't known existed, a fierce love that fueled her every decision. The silver phoenix pendant around her neck, once a small token from grace, became a symbol of her rebirth. It reminded her daily that strength could rise even from the harshest ashes. If you've ever faced the bitter sting of abandonment or witnessed the delicate process of rebuilding trust, you understand the courage it takes to stand tall after falling. Rachel's story is not just about pain, but about the triumph of the human spirit, the reclamation of identity, and the power of speaking one's truth. Her victory wasn't a fairy tale ending, but a real, raw transformation, grounded in authenticity and love. As Rachel rocked her son to sleep one quiet evening, she whispered promises of hope and protection into the soft night air. The path ahead remained uncertain, but her heart held a fierce conviction that no matter the storms, she would rise, stronger and more whole than ever before. Her story echoed a universal truth, that justice and healing come not just from others, but from the courage to embrace one's own power and demand the respect every soul deserves. Have you ever encountered moments that demanded you redefine your strength? Rachel's journey challenges us all to find that courage within ourselves and to remember that even when the hardest battles are fought alone, victory is always possible. Months passed, and with each dawn, Rachel felt herself emerging from the shadows of that painful chapter, stronger, more resolute, and more deeply connected to the woman she had always been, beneath the layers of doubt and loss. The fragile newborn she once held trembling in the hospital was now a vibrant little boy whose laughter filled their modest apartment with warmth and light. The necklace Grace had given her, the silver phoenix, rested gently against her collarbone, a constant reminder not only of survival, but of transformation. Rachel's journey was far from over, but the scars that once threatened to define her were now badges of honor, testament to battles fought and overcome. Her relationship with Mike had evolved, carved from honesty and effort rather than empty promises. He had learned, painfully but sincerely, what it meant to be present, to show up in ways that mattered, and to support without conditions. There were still moments of tension, days when the old wounds whispered doubts, but the foundation of respect and shared commitment, planted firmly beneath it all, offered hope for a future built on mutual care. Rachel knew her worth. No longer would she permit herself to be invisible or dismissed. Her voice, once silenced by abandonments and whispers, now carried an authority that inspired those who heard it. Rachel became an active member of the mothers' group that had once simply offered solace. She shared her story openly, her honesty stirring courage in other women wrestling with their own shadows. Together, they formed a community, a tapestry woven with threads of resilience, kindness, and empowerment. She worked alongside Grace, whose unexpected kindness had sparked the turning point in her darkest hour, to support other women navigating their paths through motherhood and hardship. The necklace, given as a symbol of renewal, had blossomed into a talisman of collective strength, binding them in sisterhood and shared purpose. One crisp afternoon, as Rachel watched her son play in the sunlit park, a sense of peace settled deep within her. The world, still flawed and unpredictable, now seemed a place where she could carve joy and security, not just for herself, but for her family, and for every woman whose story echoed hers. The experience that had once threatened to break her had forged a new identity, a woman unyielding, compassionate, and fiercely protective of her own light. She often reflected on that moment of deepest despair in the hospital, the whispered gossip, the solitude of labor, and the unexpected kindness of a stranger who delivered not only a gift but a lifeline. The truth she carried now was universal and powerful, that no matter how cruel the world may seem, there is always potential to rise again, to reclaim dignity and hope through resilience and love. To everyone listening and watching, if you've ever felt overlooked, abandoned, or dismissed, take this story as a reminder that your strength is greater than any trial. Reach out. Find your community, and never underestimate the power of kindness, both to give and to receive. That simple thread can change the course of a life, just as it did for Rachel. Is this story resonated with you? Please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories of courage and hope. See you in our next story.